sure you've noticed how people are feeling about his death and the memories and the emotions that it evokes. If you consider that he presided over apartheid death squads and started the country on the journey to freedom, you can imagine the complexity of emotion. You might feel different things at different times. Many people feel different things based on where they are in society, what their own memories are. In February last year, de Klerk attended the opening of Parliament despite insisting in an interview that week that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. That led to the EFF demanding that he be removed. One person who was there on that night was the diversity expert Asanda Ngoasheng, and she joins us now. Asanda, good afternoon to you. I'm sure you remember this very clearly. There was a big fight about it in Parliament. I mean, how do you view what's been happening, what people have been saying about de Klerk?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I remember it very clearly because we were sitting and doing State of the Nation analysis when this whole issue of de Klerk being the chambers came up, and it was quite surprising to see the ANC defending the former president, particularly because he had stated clearly that he didn't think that apartheid was a crime against humanity, which was a point of big contention, and also because he had never really apologized for the atrocities of apartheid. And a lot of people have said, and I also agree, that one of the biggest problems we still continue to face today is that because there was never an acknowledgement of the breadth of the atrocities of apartheid, of the trauma of apartheid, that there seems to still be people who are in some ways apartheid nihilists or who minimize in their understanding the impact of apartheid. And it's been interesting to see the difference between, the ways in which the older people remember de Klerk and the ways in which the younger people remember de Klerk. And I think that, of course, it's true that he does have a mixed legacy. But if we want to be cut and dry about it, it's a very clear legacy to me, because essentially what happened is that he changed his mind. He went from being a very, very evil man who believed that black people did not deserve humanity and deserved to be encamped in prison-like circumstances, which townships were, and believed that they deserved to be, without the right to vote, without the right to, basic human necessities. If you remember, during the height of the 90s, this kind of load shedding that we see now was an everyday thing for black people, while the white citizens of South Africa continued to have electricity. Also, we had, his participation in the Klerk 4, his participation in the twins who were killed in the Transkei, and many, many other atrocities that his victims are still waiting for answers on. And so I think he has a very dark legacy. And I think that while he changed his mind and somehow decided to participate in the transition, I don't think that that's necessarily a sign that he was a man that was truly changed and that truly believed in the importance of liberating black people and allowing black people to have full franchise. And I think that's why we saw this kind of hesitation and disregard and kind of an apartheid apologist stance coming from him and his foundation for the latter, for most of the existence. And it's only like at the very last minute that we saw yesterday a video coming out purporting to be an apology. And for many people it was too little too late, because the damage had already been done, and he had missed such a huge opportunity to bring us together as black and white to say what we did was wrong, what we did was unconscionable, and what he did was inhumane, and that people should never even consider to do anything like that to other human beings, and that racism was really a crime against humanity and one that we should take so seriously. And because he didn't do that, it allowed white people, and in particular certain sectors of the population, to want to continue in this path of white supremacy and believing that white people were superior and black people were inferior, and that's why it was okay for us to be subjugated as black people.
Mac Maharaj made an interesting point talking to us yesterday. He said that de Klerk understood the need for transition, but he did not seem to understand transformation. I mean, those are very different things. I mean, transformation is, I suppose transformation is about diversity, but it's also about an end to white supremacy. Transition, well, I mean, there's the sort of idea that certain people would have special places. By certain people, I mean, white people.
I mean, I think that I watched this video just recently of Nelson Mandela being asked how he felt about receiving the Nobel Peace Prize with FW de Klerk, and he said something very important. He said, what is he being rewarded for? For taking us out of the jail that him and his comrades put us in? For banning us as a political party that him and his comrades had banned? And so essentially what he undid the act of him and those who came before him. And he didn't, it's not like here was a man who had nothing to do with apartheid that came and fought for an end to apartheid. Here was one of the architects. Here was one of the relations of the architects of apartheid who had a change of heart. And I don't think, like Mark Maharaj, that the change of heart was necessarily altruistic or morally based. I think that part of it was that South Africa was under sanctions. South Africa was beginning to no longer be profitable because it was being excluded from the international trade, it was being excluded from international sport, and it was becoming a pariah state. And so there's something that needed to change. And so that is how and why the National Party decided that maybe it was time to start negotiating. They didn't start negotiating because they suddenly realized that what they did was wrong or that what they did was inhumane. And I think it's in this light that we need to be able to read history honestly and stop believing the lie that says that, they had a change of heart. They didn't. That's why he couldn't apologize until the very end. Essentially, he probably even apologized just to claim his own entry into heaven if he's a believer of heaven. That's why the apology was so last minute, because if he had believed in the need for transition from a moral perspective, he would have spoken out against the evil and the pain that they caused to so many people, that they continue to cause, by the way, because one of the biggest problems with apartheid is that although the policies are gone, although a lot of the laws are gone, the legacy of apartheid continues, and apartheid continues to replicate itself. Who is poor in South Africa right now? Black people. Who is unemployed in South Africa right now? The majority are black. Who is homeless? Who is without electricity, without sanitation, and all of those things. And if you look at the state of white people right now in South Africa, even the poorest white person is still miles ahead of black people. Even the homeless white man is still miles ahead of the homeless black man. Even a poor white man is still miles ahead of a poor black man, because if you are a poor white man, you are likely to live in a suburb, in a former white-only suburb, which has access to services. You are likely to be able to take your child to, even if it's the cheapest so-called Model C school that there is, former white school, which has a better quality than the poorest school for black people. And so that inequality continues. And that gap between the races continues precisely because the system of apartheid, because it was, it was basically created by people who understood sociology and used socialization and brainwashing and put in place structures that were and continue to be alive long after the architects have died, and will continue, unfortunately, for a few more generations, unless we start doing a lot more to change and shift things. And by doing things, I'm not just talking about BE and affirmative action,
sure,
because whilst they have made some gains, they haven't changed the fortune
sure,
of the majority of South Africans who still continue to be poor,
yeah,
and who still continue to be black. And that
Asanda,
is why
yes,
people have such pain about this.
So Asanda, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and you make an interesting point about sociology, because I think Verwoerd might have actually got his doctorate in sociology. I'd need to check that. It also gets to a bigger question about saying sorry. Saying sorry for apartheid. And I think this is a question that's much bigger than de Klerk. It's about showing repentance. And that's about white people saying explicitly that apartheid was wrong. It's also quite complicated because, the time has moved on. You can say you benefited. I mean, I benefited from apartheid. Can you say that, someone who's white and younger than me is responsible for it? I don't know if you could. So it's very complicated. But I think deep down, the reason that this is such a big issue is that de Klerk, as a symbol of something, and the people who were with him as symbols, who actually were active, they gave apologies at the Truth Commission, but they didn't give the apology that people deserved.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the problem, that they missed a very important opportunity right at the beginning to declare that apartheid was wrong, so that we're not sitting having these arguments about the extent of apartheid's wrongness, but that we're having, conversations about which ways was it wrong? How deep did the wrongness go, rather than was it even, something that was wrong? And that's the biggest issue that we have. And I think that de Klerk and so many others missed that big opportunity. And so now we sit still with the unfinished business of the apology that never came, of the forgiveness that was given, because, Nelson Mandela asked black people to forgive, and, a lot of people did forgive, but there was never an apology. So how do you forgive somebody who has not apologized? And I want to correct something or clarify something and say, this is part of the problem that we talk about, say we benefited from apartheid. It should be that the conversations we're having is we continue to benefit from the system of apartheid as white people, because the legacy of apartheid continues. Even though the system is gone, even though the laws are gone, to be white in South Africa is to still be in a position of privilege, precisely because your life existence is based on the fact that there once was a system called apartheid, and it privileged you and your ancestors in ways that, in the same way that it disadvantaged, the black people and their ancestors.
People are different and will have different views, but it's one of the overriding problems in our society that there's been no proper accounting. We had the Truth Commission, and the Truth Commission was a deliberate thing. I mean, very controversial on all sides of the political spectrum at the time, then and probably now. But the whole point of it was, and I think we need to keep coming back to this, the whole point of it was that there were not prosecutions for the people who did not do what they were supposed to do at the Truth Commission. I mean, we all know this. There's sort of I think it was just Eugene de Klerk and maybe one other who went to jail for what they did during apartheid. And even he's been released now. The point is that there were no prosecutions, and that still is inexplicable to me, and it gets to the heart of the peace and justice argument. We made compromises to get to peace, but because we made compromises, there was no justice, and because there's no justice, there's now can be no peace.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think people make the mistake of thinking that, the absence of violence, in the same way that you saw in the 80s, is a sign that there's peace. There's no peace in South Africa. There's a lot of violence in South Africa because we are a nation that is broken. We are a nation that is yet to heal. And we are a nation that is yet to reconcile in the ways that matter and the ways that are important. You cannot have reconciliation, social cohesion, justice, without, peace even, without actually doing the difficult work of bringing justice to people. We need to start having conversations about how do we begin the process of ensuring that the majority of black people who remain poor are not. How do we begin the process of ensuring that mining companies pay more royalties? How do we begin the process of ensuring that, every single person that lives in this country is able to benefit from the wealth that this country gives us on a daily basis as a country? And those are the questions that remain, unanswered. And a lot of people like to rely and over-rely, I say, on the fact that, black people are in power now, you shouldn't be saying these things. It's not good for black people to be in power if all they have is political power and the economic power continues to be in the hands of a small minority of white people. It's no good for the country to still be in a situation where the majority of the land still belongs to a minority of people, and the majority of the resources are still owned and managed and driven by a minority population. So to remove the laws and the policies of apartheid was good, but it was merely the start. And we haven't done the further work that needs to be done. We haven't had enough conversations about what happened. People are still discovering what happened. There's new conversations happening about Indian people and indentured labor and how Indian people came to South Africa as indentured labor and the hurt and the trauma of that. There's still conversations happening about Chinese people, about the difference between Taiwanese and Chinese and Japanese people, and still conversations about, the colored question and the relationship between so-called colored and Khoi people and African people, or black Africans as it were. And so all of those conversations and those complexity emanate from the fact that we still have many conversations to be had. We still have many truths to be told, and we still need to get to a point one day where we can tell a South African story that is true for everybody. that is honest about the role that every single person plays. And until we get to that point, we're going to continue to see the kind of violence we saw in Gauteng and KZN. We're going to continue to see the kind of rampant crime that we see with people being shot, live during a Zoom session, etc. Because we are a country that is broken. We are a country that is unsettled, spiritually even, if you want to take it that far. Because we are not reconciled with ourselves, we are not reconciled with each other. And this is the legacy of FW de Klerk and many of his generation. And just because they realized that financially it made more sense to include black people in the economy and do the things that needed to be done to make that happen, it doesn't mean that at a heart level, at a moral level, at a mental level, they understood what it was people were talking about when they said they wanted liberation. Because if you read anything that's coming out of him or his foundation over the past 20, almost 30 years, it doesn't speak to somebody who was reconciled with the fact that apartheid was a crime against humanity.
Asanda Ngoasheng, thanks very much indeed. The diversity expert, really do appreciate the time.